I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
The sad thing is, as I've been watching the playoffs in EU, the overwhelming sentiment I've had the whole time is like, God, I wish there was a way all of these teams could be eliminated now. Like, Rogue's about the only one that I don't think that of, and that's just because the expectations should have been so low for them, but they're actually kind of like pretty legit in terms of the way they play. But even then, there's no way they can win the LCS. So
the way that
fuck, right?
Sure, I mean, I just view it as which team do we send to Worlds as third. I've decided there's no chance that any team outside of G2 Fnatic are going to make like a Giga Deep run, the way they're all playing, right? So
here's the sad thing, mate, is that, you know what, as much as people might like to bag on NA, mate, if they send CLG as their third team, all three NA teams at least know how to play the game, basically.
I haven't watched enough NA to
CLG actually has macro, mate. They can even 1-3-1. Like, that's actually quite rare for an NA team. They're actually not terrible.
That's actually very rare for an NA team, to be honest.
Think how rare that is, that the third seed from NA might actually be better than whoever the third seed from EU is.
Either way, I wish if any team from EU goes, I think it should be Rogue. Because, honestly, having a rookie team going in every year has been really good for the development of the rookie scene.
Like, thing is, it won't be. It will be Schalke now. I put money on that.
I'm supporting Rogue all the way, so
it'll be Schalke or Splice. Sadly, one of the two. It'll be one of those teams. So it'll be the two shit, boring teams that represent everything you wouldn't want in it, because they have no chance for an upset.
Splice.
They could still win, mate. Sadly, they could still win.
Yeah, they could still. Yeah. Well, if Rogue beat Schalke, Splice can't make it in.
The problem is, I guess I am being too harsh on all these teams, because again, what you always have to remember is, if Origin and Misfits just did what they were supposed to do, this wouldn't even be a discussion. Like, you know what? If this was a discussion of, like, who's going to be the fifth best team, it's a pretty cool discussion now all of a sudden, you know. Hey, that's not bad. I don't mind who it is then. It can be Rogue, can be Splice. That's cool. It's fifth best team. Problem is, you've wasted all that fucking talent. Like, that's the saddest thing, isn't it? Normally when you're trying to make a super team, the problem is it evolves something like, oh, and then I'd take Reckless. It's like, well, why would Reckless leave his team? So it's like, yeah, it's just hypothetical, isn't it? Mate, the sad thing is, you could take, just from teams that didn't make the playoffs in LEC, players that would make like an LEC winning roster.
Yeah.
It's actually disgusting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Origin's collapse and Misfits' like glorious mismanagement of their roster are like the two reasons why Europe are so weak right now. Like, it's nothing to do with anything else other than the fact that the two organizations that should be able to like shit out a world's level team whenever they want were somehow able to fuck it up this split. So right now we are just hoping for like Origin to suddenly look in format.
By the way, did you like the banter tweet that VDS did to Deficio?
Oh,
that was legit.
No, I saw that.
That was legit. That was legit.
I saw that.
I enjoyed that.
He's getting influenced.
That was good. That was good though. He pulled that off well, especially because like he even did the thing where it was like almost an immediate clapback. Like there wasn't much time between it. So respect. I like that.
Yes.
Whereas like everyone knows, even though you do it for the sake of needling people, it's not really that sick when you like just do a reply to a tweet 3 months later when it turns out the person was wrong. That's not really that great. I know everyone does it anyway because people are petty, but that's not really worth much more than clout for idiots for me. I think that's kind of whack.
Sure.
So Cyclo's topic here was that starting this split, teams should absolutely recognise that rookies are more valuable than super teams. So obviously the initial premise there is pretty solid, but do you have anything extra to add to start the topic off?
Well, the reason I wanted to bring this up is I feel like starting this split, there's been evidence on both sides of the argument, whereas teams with pretty much star-studded lineups have failed. Meanwhile, teams that have adapted and brought more rookies have found more success than before.
Do you want any examples you want to throw out?
I mean, the big example for super team that fell off real bad is obviously Misfits. And for the team that brought in a bunch of rookies and started skyrocketing was Rogue.
Right. Also, this premise.
I mean, I think I think the reason that you see the rookie teams work out more often than not is that the key thing is synergies, having synergies within your team. And obviously, when you build up a team of veterans that don't necessarily back each other up in the appropriate way, like no specific member outside of maybe Max Law and Misfits was bad, but they weren't very good fits for each other, right? Mm-hmm. The thing is that when you're dealing with rookies are a lot more malleable in the sense that they can become fits for each other. They're still developing, you know? Every rookie has done like one thing really, really good in their own way to climb high up on the ladder. And that's probably worked really well for them in the National League scene as well. But then every rookie gets to a point where they can't do that anymore. And then they have to adapt. And every veteran player's already gone through all of that stuff. And because they've already gone through all of that stuff, they've now developed into like their own system of play that they're no longer going to be able to just like develop away from. You know, they can't just reset and start from ground zero. Whereas all of the rookies can develop along with the rest of their players on their team to be the guy that team needs eventually. They're more likely to be able to do that than the veteran player is, who's developed a hell of a long way to get here, and most likely doesn't see any good reason why he should have to change all the stuff that's worked for him to this point, because it's so much more than when he started off from. But all the rookie players, they accept that they definitely will have to change. So they are always more likely to be able to change to fit. So even if this rookie team doesn't necessarily have synergies right now, those players could easily develop to have those synergies. Splice is a really famous example of this, for example. They weren't really very synergetic in their first split, but in their second split, they were a top 2 team in Europe. You know? So rookies are just always going to be more malleable. So even if the roster building itself isn't that good, they can make up for it by just adapting, essentially. And they're more likely to be able to do that than veteran players.
Yeah.
I'll give you a side reason as well, because I've noticed this from games as well. Like, when you have a veteran player who changes his role totally, or his style of play totally, or does something different about his game than you are traditionally used to, actually, I think people take the wrong tack. They think, oh, well, since you're a veteran, it actually should be easier because you've played the game longer, you know, you've had teammates maybe who did those things. It's actually, the reason I think it's the opposite, and the reason I think it's less likely a veteran will change, is because if a veteran ever succeeded with a different style of play, it will also always be in the back of his head of like, well, if this team doesn't work out, I could always go to another team and do what I used to do, or be the carry role I used to have before, or whatever it might be. Whereas if you're a new player, you don't have that option. Like, you have to try and make this chance succeed, otherwise you might never be in LCS again, as we've seen in like, I actually still, what's funny is on this topic, when you look back now, I actually think one of the dumbest things that the NA teams did wasn't that they didn't give people tries. Like, they give plenty of rookies tries. Like, they used to themselves do a Misfits and sub a guy in fucking 3/4 of the way through a split, let him play 3 bad games, and then never ever have him come to the LCS again. Like, the stupid thing is they gave people a try, just not under reasonable circumstances. So I actually think, if anything, they tanked their own talent in that respect by thinking that they could just come in for 2 games. It's like, oh, you didn't prove yourself. It's like, this isn't even fucking a reasonable job interview, is it? It'd be like if you would, it's a bit like if your job interview, right, was you're a guy who's never done this job before, and they go, right, Benson, get out. And he just leaves at 2 p.m. and you go, sit in his seat, go on, start his work. And it's like, what does he do though? Never mind that, start his work, prove yourself. And then at 4 p.m. you come in and go, didn't really like the way you worked today, you're fired. It's like, and then you give him a negative reference to all the future bosses. That's like what bringing fucking rookies in was like in the past. The key for me is, like, I think Rogue's a good example here. Give rookies a whole split. Give them some actual fucking chance, like a real team.
Yeah. And then in Europe, you have all the examples to back that up. Like, again, I've said this a lot, but like H2K 2015, Splice and G2 in 2016, but Splice is the big one there because they're the ones that weren't good off the bat while G2 were. Misfits in 2017 peaked very fucking late. Vitality in 2018 peaked early, then had a huge dip, and then they made it all the way to Worlds. Like, there's so many examples in Europe that I don't really think there's an excuse for an organization in Europe to have that NA mentality of you don't put up in the next 2 weeks, clearly not going to put up at all. There are so many counter examples in Europe to make that work. And honestly, the NA...
By the way, just as a quick aside, one other thing, just for the sake of when we're having these discussions, like, we're not Riot Games giving out an award. Like, we don't have to literally only talk about someone being a rookie if they only began this split. Like, we're using rookie in the colloquial sense. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like when Veteran says they're rookies for Vitality, it doesn't matter that some of them played for Giants before. Who gives a fuck? Like, all those players are rookies until this year, as far as I'm concerned. Same as, like, the idea that, like, Wiggly in CLG isn't a rookie now. Like, motherfuckers barely played League of Legends professionally. Like, we may as well just call all these people rookies. I prefer if we use the old school terminology. That, like, rookie is what you called until you get your real experience. Veteran is what you called when you've really put in your hours. Like, you're not really a veteran just because you played 4 splits of LCS on a bottom team. Like,
True.
You're probably just in the middle at that point in time. For me, a veteran's like someone who's had playoffs and they've been around a long time, they've been in different squads. So I'm just making that side point because I just feel like if we nitpick on that, it just actually ruins the argument. It's kind of like idiots who, I mean, I love it because it's instant mute bait for me. The second anyone, when I make some sort of a tweet, it's like, you said LCS, it used to be called EU LCS back then. It's LEC now. Like, I just mute that person instantly. It's like your main goal is for us not to have the discussion we're trying to have now, not to add to the discussion, not make an interesting point. You're just here to waste everyone's time. So anyway, do you want to extend this point further? Is there another point you wanted to make, Matt?
Yeah, kind of. I feel like after this split, and to what extent that this whole rookies working out versus super teams bombing out, it really should be a calling to the owners and to the organizations for next year to just really stop trying to build those perfect teams with all those really, seemingly crazy players and put them in pretty much any kind of configuration that they think will work, and just get some goddamn rookies from EU Masters. I feel like it'll just work out so much better in the end.
I mean, for me, one thing I would say that also tilts me about the franchising era is the other side of the lie they always told us that we've referenced a million times, Veteran, where they were like, but on the low end, it'll mean that because you can't get relegated, you'll try all the rookies, which they never did. What's annoying to me is, in a franchise model where you're like profit sharing, and also, by the way, you're all still bleeding so much money that no one's making fucking money anyway, it doesn't make any sense to make a roster that's trying to become the 4th best. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. The only premise for every team in a franchise league should be every season trying to create a team that wins the whole season. That should be the only logic. So if you're the team who has the 4th best roster, you should be making the changes to try and become number 1. You're not making money anyway. In that scenario, why not? So to me, that's also why it makes even more sense to gamble on a really good rookie. So someone like Larson would be an obvious example if he wasn't already on Rogue, as opposed to just get someone like Senkox. Like, that's an obvious example of where, like, are we going to win LEC with Senkox? No. So what's the point in even playing him? Like, this isn't the old school. That made perfect sense when you just wanted to stay in LEC, because Senkox is an LEC level mid. But to me, that's the example of where I think everyone should gamble on rookies, unless you're the G2 team who can make the classic upgrade, but that is almost guaranteed to work on some level,
Yeah, true. I mean, they literally bought like every S tier player possible. It was barely even like a synergies thing. They literally took all the players everyone was saying S last year, and then the big gamble they had was on the perks roll swap thing. But that obviously.
And let's face it, they're not a good example of an org making a super team, because the org had nothing to do with it. A player called Perks, who had complete control of the scene, made his own super team based on players he thought were really good. That's very different to someone in Misfits going, I think this guy is good, and this guy, and I remember this guy from Korea. Like, that's a very different scenario, I'll take a player making a super team way more than a guy who's just looking at names.
Oh, yeah, true. But very often, like, I mean, Perks is kind of like a unique example these days. There are a couple of teams where there's like clearly a player in charge of this stuff, but generally speaking, it's someone else almost entirely. Like, I heard that apparently Excel's team was actually built by their performance director, who is not some guy who's had experience even coaching in League of Legends, let alone playing League of Legends, Like, you do get like owners and backdoor staff making
when you say
these
built,
kinds of decisions.
As in he like literally
bought in
shows who
Keon
they
and
would
Kasing and
bring
people
in.
like bought in Keon and Kasing and people like this.
By the way, get ready for this to be an element no one's thought of. So I know you're all out there. A load of you, even when I tell you this, secretly think I'm full of shit, right? Come on, Thorin. What could possibly be wrong about adding a sports psychologist? I'll tell you what's going to be wrong. Are you ready? Is they are going to tell you to put player A in who is shit because he doesn't cause problems and has good communication over player B who is 10 times the player in the server because he seems to have, he's having a lot of issues like relating to his teammates. Like, as soon as that guy now has precedence, that is madness. That's like HR speak where you're just going to ruin your whole fucking company. Like that, it'll never make any sense to go along those lines.
Yep. True. I mean that, a lot of these guys end up with a lot of influence. You have to bear in mind, by the way, guys, that when you get professionals from outside of esports, they generally speaking, no offense to all of you guys who are like in-house guys, but they generally speak have better social skills than a lot of the staff that have come up through League of Legends, and they are much better at playing that kind of game and getting some robust sense of power very fucking fast. Like that happens so much, and you'd be very surprised about that. I think the public would be very surprised about that. I mean, I don't think you'd be surprised about that at all, Thorin, given your war on Refresh and their sports psychology based advertising.
Well, it's like the joke. I'll tell everyone the old joke I used to have about Weldon, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not in any way surprised that people hired Weldon back in the day. Because guess what? The first 20 minutes of him talking to you is fucking brilliant. But here's the problem. It's like, this is... Okay, do you want a mildly edgy, but not really edgy take that actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it? The reason why I can't actually have any level of respect for people who get triggered by Donald Trump's tweets is that's the whole show. His tweet is the whole show. His tweet isn't what he's going to do or something he even could do, actually logistically within the US government. His tweet is for the effect that it has, and that's it. That's the end of it. So when you get triggered by it as well, it's like, oh my God, look what that's... It's like, that was the purpose of the tweet, was to get the attention, to get some interest, maybe even distract you, make a funny point, whatever it might be. But that's the whole show, was the tweets. That's how he got elected. That's the whole premise of what he did. And that's all that happened since then. You notice he hasn't acted on 50 bazillion of the tweets. Most of them are just fodder for Twitter and shit posts, but yeah, from a president. Same premise with Weldon. It's like the joke is you hire him because the initial interview was so brilliant. You don't know that was the show. What he just did there was the show. Now he'll be able to do that on all your players. He can give them the half-an-hour interview speech to them, and they'll all buy into it as well. But in 3 weeks, when you need real results and you actually need some, then you might be in some trouble. Now, it's different in CLG. He has a guy who, as far as I can tell, knows a fuck ton about the game, who's actually telling him what to do. Now it's making sense. Now we've got a good marriage. We've got someone who can convince you with someone who might know what they're talking about. So that's where you've got a good pairing. But I agree. Like, these people, by default, should instantly climb the hierarchies of any esports org because they're working with a bunch of antisocial nerds who don't even have any tact usually. Like, but that's the saddest thing, Veteran, is I've no doubt loads of sports psychologists very early on are going to find initial success because just to tell a player he did the wrong thing but without telling him he's shit is like revolutionary levels of communication in esports. Like, people can't even, how is he doing it? What is this magic?
No, that is legit like revolutionary in a lot of aspects. Like, a lot of the good things that Young Buck does as a coach, he will say that he like learned from Weldon because Weldon was able to do those things. That stuff is revolutionary. It's really interesting that you said that, though, because there is actually a concept in Europe of the 1 week manager. Like, there are plenty of managers that last, like, they are really turbo smurfing the first week, right? Then after that, it's all fucking downhill. But the first week is always insane. But I've met so many 1 week managers in my lifetime, and there are so many 1 week managers on like multiple other teams that have done the really good first week, and then they're gone 3 weeks later because after the first week it was all downhill. But it reminded me of that when you were saying that, like, the first 20 minutes, like, that's the show, blah blah blah, and eventually like it'll wear off. Like, there's so much of that in terms of,
and there's just not more than that sometimes, you know. Like the part of the trick of what they do is they always make it seem like the real development's going to come 2 weeks from now. Like, we're just laying the groundwork for this. Look, let's all get together and you know, who are you as a person? Forget the player. Let's find out. It's like, listen, mate, this is all great stuff if we're talking like a bunch of fucking primary school kids, but we're trying to actually get some like impact in the game here. So, like, half that shit's mad overblown. But anyway, whatever. People will never believe me, sadly. I know, I realise I'm like Cassandra on this, so I'm just doomed to say what's going to happen. And then have people half a decade later tell me, like, oh, you're right on that. It's like, yeah, it's too late now, isn't it? It's too late now. Freak who was trying to convince me that best of threes made sense in the fucking LCS playoffs in 2013. Fuck you. So anyway, people don't know how bad it used to be. Right? I should just go back and find some of the fucking VODs and stuff. It'd be outrageous. But anyway, is there anything else to this topic?
There's like a parting comment I guess I can make is that in terms of narratives, it seems like, you know, there's always those big players that people really like, but in terms of narratives, I always think it's always like so much more, like it's always so much better to see someone you've never really heard of step into the scene and just wreck everyone, as opposed to a player that is well established and you know is good keep winning. I feel like seeing rookies just tear up the scene is always going to be what keeps the entire entertainment part of the show fresh.
Yeah, true. And I kind of want Rogue to go to Worlds so that orgs are encouraged to give us more of that. Like, I think it's something that orgs can buy into, is the idea of being the next rookie team that goes in. Because at that point, it just clearly is a guaranteed thing. Because you had to have the entire org almost entirely collapse for them to go in. So clearly this is something that works. It's not something that necessarily even needs two splits. There are multiple rookie teams now that have proven it. If Rogue go towards, I think that could be a really good signal to the other orgs. So I hope we get that, and I hope it works out in that way.
All right. Yeah, cheers, mate.
Yep, cheers.
I actually do find it hilarious how badly League is actually set up in terms of the circuit as far as competitive play goes, because I don't know if you know from any games that have an open circuit, but if you ever have a break like we're going to have before Worlds after the splits end, that absolutely kills everyone's form. It doesn't matter how good your boot camp is. It's very rare you come out of that boot camp in like your peak form for the year. It's just too long, you know. You can't have a month off.
Oh, I think this has... I mean, okay, so I think this might be one of the reasons why the first seed doesn't actually typically win the tournament.
I would guess so. They stopped playing the quickest of everyone.
Yeah, whereas the Gauntlet people, and this has always been criticism of the Gauntlet, and now some teams are saying that they don't like the fact that the second and third seed in Gauntlet because they're not going to get a break. I mean, they don't get a break. They go from Gauntlet straight to their bootcamp at Worlds. They don't get to do anything else. And typically, only SKT. SKT is the only team from a major region that has won the World Championships while being first seed. They're the only one. Every other team that won the World Championship was a second or third seed. They had to go through Gauntlet, and then they had to immediately go boot camp. They didn't have this luxury, you know. And Europe's always had like a pretty weak first week as well, and I think the break times has always given us that. Like we haven't ever been in form in the first week that we've been playing, you know. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me if that's like a typical thing. Because that's a provable thing when it comes to Europe and when it comes to results in the World Championship.
There's even a microcosm version of this, which is that, okay, so obviously people in LCS will be familiar with this concept. The concept of when you go to the playoffs, skipping around because you finish top of the group. Well, here's the interesting thing. When we used to have LAN tournaments in Counter-Strike, we still do now actually, but there's just not many of them that are around. When you used to have LAN tournaments, that would be a group stage, and the winner of the group skipped to the semi-finals, and the other teams played in the round of 6, as you might call it. Mm-hmm. The teams that skipped to the semis, for literally something like 5 years, never ever made the final. So even though that the reason that's a micro version is because that tournament is all being played in like 4 days, right?
Yeah.
But believe it or not, being the team that doesn't play on like the third day or the second day, fucks you. Even that fucks you. Like as a general rule, and it's funny because people would not want this. Like in a double elim tournament, obviously you don't want to go to the lower bracket, but that's actually because in double elim tournaments you often have to play 2 games a day. That's the real disadvantage. It's not playing more matches. I've generally found as a general rule, if you are the team who comes out of a lower bracket scenario, first of all, you're probably the best team of the lower bracket because you had to get through it. You had to show that you were in form. But generally, I find it better to maintain the form and then go into the next match than to have the break. Or at least, I guess the fair thing to say would also be, I guess in this sense, nobody's mastered how you sort of like stay tip top when you're not playing, basically. So it's kind of an easy answer to say, just make you play the game. But I have just noticed in general, I think on a larger scale, when you have weeks off, I think it applies. I think on a micro scale, if you make the whole tournament a week, it applies. Like, it just generally seems like, unless you're playing so many games, it literally fatigues you. It's always better to have played the games and keep your form ticking over.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually really interesting. The tendency you brought up there about how they
it was weird. Yeah. Because that was the first one I noticed it when it happened a couple of times, and it wasn't until literally like a couple of years ago in CSGO that kind of thing stopped happening, basically.
I wonder how successful Group A in Worlds generally is, because they all do 1 week where it's like everyone is kind of playing like every day. Or it's like at least a lot more mixed up. And then the second week will always be like first day is Group A, second day is Group B, third day Group C. Like I wonder if there's like a tendency that the people who win in Group A are like worse or something.
You know, the funny thing is, I'm trying to think it was when I watched this show that just came out recently. It was called The Queue, which is this thing where they had Dash interview Doublelift, and I think he interviewed Sven Skaren as well. And they're in like a studio setup, and he's like one-on-one interviewing, like a Larry King interview or something. It was pretty good, actually. Like, generally did a pretty good job with it. He had a lot of space as well. It's like a long form interview. And in the show, Doublelift mentions something that I've tried to bring up so many times, and every time League fans and Reddit overwhelmingly tell me I'm an idiot and I've got no point whatsoever. So the point I made years ago went like this, Veteran. Right? Yep. You know the whole system Riot uses where you can't have the same region in the same group, which is why we have the pools system, to divide people out into the pools.
Yeah.
Because that way you make it so that since they can, I mean, even though technically, obviously, there can be 2 teams in pool 2, they just aren't allowed to play each other anyway. There's like the rule where they have to move to another group. What's funny is the reason people are in favour of that is not a terrible reason. It's so that you always get matches you don't have in your domestic region. You've spent all year long watching your domestic region. Now you get at a minimum, they're going to play someone from Taiwan or China or Korea, whatever, right? That makes sense on a base level. Now, the problem is the conclusion people draw from that is totally wrong. They draw the conclusion from that. This also makes the tournament better because now you're going to have like more fair group draws. No, what Doublelift made his passing point is a point I've made every time. So what he said like, killing yourself working for the number 1 seed isn't even worth it, because he said, think about the year that we went as TSM and our group was Samsung and Royal Never Give Up. Those were we were the number 1 seed and we got Samsung and Royal Never Give Up. I made this point years ago. Number 1 seed fucks you in your arse if you are European or NA, because it means that, guess what? We all know the number 2 seed from China and Korea could be in your group and they could be the favourites for the whole tournament.
Yeah.
No one would seed this way. If you did seeding 1 to 16, I realise in League it's way harder than another game, because you're going to always be gambling. You're always going to be doing things that will seem unfair, like you're going to give a Korean team a higher seed where they haven't yet proven it. I get that. But I think if you just looked at the groups you would get, I once did a little test example, they'll be way fairer than the ones we get currently. Because at the moment, what we do is we get a team and we tell them, congratulations, you worked really hard during the split, you've earned the number 1 seed, now let's just do a random draw within certain limitations. You've randomly been drawn the hardest possible group, fuck you. It's like, and then we just talk shit to that team. Meanwhile, as everyone knows, if you get super lucky, there's scenarios, you know, where it can be better to be a number 2 seed in pool 2 than number 1. Like, what if you get the weakest Korean team as your number 1 seed, no Chinese team, and then you get the number 1 seed from fucking LMS or whatever? Like, sound. I'll take that all day long. Brilliant. I'll have that group 100 times over the Samsung Royal Never Give Up one.
I think the reason why the obvious counter arguments don't really work here is because of the fact that the second seed is normally the one that wins the whole tournament. Like, actually, if you're first seed, you are almost guaranteed to be in there with someone who is a contender for the entire title, because second, third seeds actually generally are the contenders.
Especially just because, like, as well, let's face it, China and Korea nearly always send a fucking super good second seed. Like, the whole point is the seeds don't make sense. Like, in smaller regions, they make more sense because there's more of a differential. But the real problem here is, this is always the flaw of this system. You're treating every team in Pool 2 as though they're identical. And yet in Pool 2, you have LMS teams and you have the second bet. You have IG and you have LMS teams. I hope that, like, the team that just won Worlds, you have them and then you have all the LMS teams. And what happens is someone rolls a dice and goes, I'll just see which you get. Did you get IG or did you get the LMS team? And then if you get the LMS team, I'm supposed to go, congratulations, you had a very good Worlds for getting out of groups. And then if you get IG, I'm supposed to go, you failed. You failed in your career. You weren't able to accomplish, because remember, you know what the beauty of it is? The exact same thing happened to fucking G2 the next year. They themselves were the number 1 seed. They got Samsung and Royal Never Give Up.
Yeah, they did.
You can't win. You can't fucking win, boys.
Yeah, no, actually.
Meanwhile, every year, fucking plebs are sat around. I love Cloud9. They are always getting out of group. They come in as the gauntlet, they fluke out and get groups in which they get the super good team and the shit middling team, and then they manage to beat the middling team. Sound. What have they done there? The expectations make no sense for these tournaments. It makes no sense at all. I still think as well, the dumbest thing anyone ever did was start up the angle of let's judge a region's strength by how one of their teams, which one goes the furthest. That has got to be the dumbest take of all time.
Okay, but I love that take because then...
No, but by that logic, you know, Veteran, by that logic, right, when Andy Murray won Wimbledon, Britain was better at tennis than any other country, despite the fact Britain's number 2 in tennis would have been like 100th.
I'm down. It's just a top heavy region, Florin. I don't know what
it's like. I used to use this as one of my flames to Brazilian fans when they would all go mad on me. I would always tell them, guys, you don't understand. This isn't about Brazil. I think your team, MIBR, is really good because they're the best team in the world at one point in time. I said, but you have to understand, logically, they're the exception. The rest of you are all utter shit. They're the 5 people who aren't utter shit. And in fact, every success they have just contrasts more how utterly shit all of you are. You shouldn't be cheering for them. They actually highlight your weakness, your absolute fear, because there was never a number 2 team that was good, a 3 team. So it's like, what are you guys taking pride in? That these guys aren't anything like you and that's why they succeed?
This is why it's worse, because... Yeah, no, it's the LMS point. The LMS point is like the huge point, actually. But the big point is that they only send 2 teams, so they don't have a 3rd seed, technically speaking, right?
Sure.
So if you're first, then you basically halve your chances of being able to get an LMS team. Whereas if you're 3rd, you're more likely to get an LMS team than anyone else, right? So you're more likely to have an easy group if you're 3rd in the major region than if you're 1st in the major region. Yeah,
it's absolutely possible. Like that. I'm also, by the way, a huge fan of the most bullshit tactic ever when you have a terrible rule system, where someone says, there's a flaw in this system, and they go, yeah, but there's no perfect solution. And then that's the logic that they use. That means you're not allowed to implement a slightly better system.
There are multiple people who use that argument for League of Legends macro, where it's like you're demanding like a level of perfection. The players they arbitrarily decided this isn't possible.
What they do is they try to imply that everyone's just LSing it, and that you're just making out they had to be perfect. No, I'm just saying be slightly worse than the worst possible thing to do. You know. Mm-hmm. It's like the old Ricky Gervais joke where he says that there was a woman he heard about who she had a problem. She was an eating addiction, right? And her problem was she was eating 10 pie and chips a day. And the problem is she was going to die because of this. She was way overweight. So Ricky Gervais's joke just goes like this. Listen, I'm not asking for much. I don't know, 9 pie and chips a day?
Okay.
Well, there you go. That's pretty good. You know, he's not telling you to go straight down to 1. Just only have 9 a day.
Okay,
By the way, speaking of which, before we start this, I'll quickly tell you a fix for the seeding system, which I think would be amazing for Worlds, and I'd love to see it. Are you ready for a genius seeding system? Because the problem I learned was this. It's the way I was doing my argument is what made it fail. So my argument was I was trying to actually, in a utopian fashion, figure out the most ideal system for getting seeding, right? So the most ideal... Yeah, wait there a second, mate. I'm just finishing this point. The ideal system for getting seeding would be to take a bunch of experts who in theory are neutral, have them between them by committee, figure out what the most fair rankings are, like, you know, a bit of concession here and there. Well, I thought this team from NA was slightly better. Nah, you know, on average, let's put him 7th instead of 6th. You know, you do that, you do a bit of negotiation. At the end, you're going to be roughly as close as you can get to some reasonable seedings, right? Because other than that, there's no real system you can use. You can't use placings in regions. They're not literally weighted against each other, right? The problem I had was this. That will never be accepted because fans and players don't accept the opinions of experts. This is my flaw. Well, here's the mental thing, Veteran. It's already been solved. It was actually solved by, of all companies, ESL. ESL have found the ultimate variant that accomplishes 90% of what I just said, but in a format that makes it instantly palatable to fans. What they do for their tournaments now, in big ESL CSGO tournaments, is they have the teams do the seeding behind the scenes. Every team must fill out 1 to 15.
Really?
16. Listen, and this is what they do. This is brilliant. They have all the teams do it, and then they aggregate them, and are you ready for the kicker that is genius, whoever thought this up?
Okay.
If you fuck with the system, and you decide, haha, I will put this team 9th to our 1st, and yours is way too far out of range, your vote doesn't get counted.
Huh. Wow.
And think about it, right?
Actually...
The reason why it's even genius is because 1, every fan's willing to accept what pros say. They'll never argue against the pros. 2, it gets fairly close to what we would have done as experts anyway. And 3, and this is the genius part, because you're in the tournament as well, you are massively incentivized to correctly seed. Because if you're the 9th seed, you don't want the 1st seed to be the 8th seed. You want them to be 1st, so there's less chance of you playing them out. Like, it's actually a great approach if you think about it. It's a very clever idea.
Yeah, and it's also, like, absurdly difficult to try to game it, because you have to have an insane level.
You need a big conspiracy, basically.
Yes,
yeah, a big one.
Yeah, because like otherwise, at best, you're going to end up with like 50% are saying this thing and 50% are saying like a completely different thing, and it's still obvious, you know? Like you have to have such a gigantic conspiracy for not to be obvious.
Isn't that a pretty cool solution, though? Like, for a compromise, I think it's pretty cool.
It is actually, yeah, it is.
Right, so Noveris's premise was, he said, EU fan perception of how good players can be meant that no rookies were seen as positively as they should have been, simply because Caps exists. So we're talking about people this year, so Humanoid, Abadage, Larson, people who've come in this year, because Caps came along and was so incredible, you feel like people undervalue the rookies?
Yeah, I think that it's more like because of how people see the game. I think that most of the player base don't actually know the ceiling. They just think, oh, this guy's the best, so he's a 10. He has everything. And then they think, okay, so in 2018, there were a couple players who were kind of close to Caps. They see Caps and they think, okay, he hasn't fallen off. He's still the number 10, the 10 out of 10. So now that there's a bigger gap, that means that the players who are now in this league are by default worse.
Right.
Okay. I wouldn't actually disagree with you there. I think, though, that what you're talking about is kind of the idea of Caps.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the idea of Caps doesn't just cloud fan perception. I would actually say that kind of thing is very commonly clouding pro players' perception. Like the reason that you normally see straight up rookie teams in Europe, and as a result, those teams actually do well, is because the rookie player base themselves are normally neglected by like player-run teams. Player-run teams are not really going to look for that unless they have to. They're always like a secondary to the devil that they know, you know? And sticking with the devil that you know can be really good, but it's not like the information isn't there to make a value judgment on a rookie. I do think that the perception that these players are so insane in this league therefore means that there's no way that people who aren't in this league could potentially grow to compete with that. Like, I think that perception exists a lot. I do have to disagree on one thing, though. I think one thing about Caps actually made it easier for rookies. And the big thing is that he wasn't a full-on hit-the-ground-running player. He was Caps and Craps, you know? And he still is Caps and Craps to a large extent, which means that because of this and because of, like, Hilly sick and Hilly shit, like, you know, all these memes that have been propagated by EU players, because of this, being inconsistent in your debut is not actually viewed as badly as it used to be. So obviously you've seen like Leader and Feeder now, right? That would be viewed so much more negatively in the Europe pre-Caps, where we were looking at like the consistency of players like Froggen and Xpeke and Nukeduck, and those were the gold standards that were being looked at. I think accepting some level of inconsistency is to the benefit of the rookies, and that has actually occurred to a large extent because of caps. So I think that's actually there as well. Obviously, it's talking a little bit psychological and a little bit in terms of narrative, but I honestly think that has helped.
I'll add in as well, like that concept of the idea of caps versus the reality of caps. The idea of caps still doesn't exist right now. Like I could see a world in which you could tell me that because of the things he went through in 2018 and be on a different team, maybe he's improved as a player. But we actually, I find it like almost impossible to even gauge what Caps' actual fucking level as a mid laner is. Like, look at the amount of games where he didn't have to be the best player to win the game. Like, I'd love to see this Caps on fucking Schalke. I think there'd be a whole bunch of games he'd fuck up. It'd be a bunch of games he'd way more hard carry that he couldn't right now in G2. But it's very difficult to even get a read on who he is as a player. So I already feel like basically to be even considered as good as Caps, you probably have to play twice as good as him right now, in my opinion.
I also think that among players, Perks is actually considered like the gold standard for mids that came out of that generation. I think most players would consider Perks to be like both consistent and insane, right? Like, I think whereas a lot of players would agree with Thorin, maybe Caps wouldn't do so well on a team like Schalke. I think that most would then think Perks would be a better fit who could carry almost any team, right? Like, I think that's the kind of guy rather than Caps. But Perks is obviously like role swapped, and Perks are considered kind of like a unique talent. And Perks actually does give shoutouts to rookie players a lot. So he kind of like goes, he kind of helps what could otherwise be a kind of old boys mentality that could come out from him. He kind of fights back against that himself. So these kinds of players aren't necessarily as damaging to rookies as you might think. Though typically speaking, players do look down on rookies, yeah. But I think these guys have actually helped rather than hindered.
Are there any actual rookies that come to mind when you think that they've been like, haven't been given their full credit or undervalued as a result of the Caps phenomenon?
Well, for example, the worst case would be Nemesis, who as soon as he came into Fnatic, everyone was just shitting on him every single day because he wasn't Caps. Simply because of that. They expected him to perform as if there was a second Caps on the league all of a sudden. And you can't expect that of a rookie player who hasn't even found his place in the team. For Caps to even become Caps, and then they expected Nemesis to be Caps on the first day of the job, basically.
Okay, because you mentioned Fnatic fans, I'm just going to wait to see if Thorin wants to come in and say something. But
I mean, on that one, I think unfortunately there's also the added element that like there's this perception. I saw so many articles written about it of like Fnatic are just geniuses as an org. They just always recruit good mid laners that work out. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, it doesn't make sense. No, they don't, because half the time period you talk about was one mid laner. Then who did they have? Febiven, right? So he worked in a team where he wasn't even the primary fucking main player in the team. And then afterwards they had Caps, who again, they had to wait over a year before that all started. Like, it's just nonsense as like a narrative. So like I don't know if you know how patterns work, guys, but 3 data points aren't enough to draw a fucking, like that line is a joke. I'm not even doing like an average hit. It's just a line that goes from one point to another. That's nothing. The data sample's non-existent there.
So I'll just come in and say that I think the reason why they shout all over Nemesis wasn't because he wasn't performing like Caps from day one or like Caps 1 year hence on day one. I think it's because when Nemesis came on, Fnatic also simultaneously had the worst period that they had ever had since Season 4, which was the last time they had anywhere close to that loss streak. And as a result, he was literally the only change. So to everyone, it didn't just look like a downgrade. It looked like a significant, record-breaking downgrade that happened. So it's a little bit more understandable in that way. I don't think it was all on Nemesis that happened. I think it was the communication aspect of Caps that has now been picked up by like a lot of different people is what they really lost. And Nemesis obviously wasn't a big communicator. But I do have to say, he got the job, he held the job. Fnatic understood it wasn't necessarily his fault, and the fan perception didn't like prevent him busting into the scene, you know? It may have prevented him getting like a higher placement, but I also think that Humanoid and Larson are better, and a lot of people are recognizing how strong Humanoid and Larson are right now. So I would argue that it's not necessary.
Wait there a second, mate. Wait there a second. We can't all talk over each other. I couldn't hear what either you said there. What did you say, Veteran?
I was saying that that both Larson and Humanoid, I think, are just straight up better than Nemesis, and people have recognized that now. And people were picking up Humanoid a lot this split, even when the Riot broadcast was saying that Humanoid was just straight garbage. So this stuff does get recognized. It can take time, yeah, but they're not preventing these guys getting their jobs, which is kind of the argument that you're making. Or are you making the argument that it's just that they just aren't being rated properly? Do you think Nemesis should have been rated higher super early on, or?
No, I don't think that he should have been rated super high. I just think that that camps being there was a big problem for the rookies coming in. Also, the Riot broadcast does make some problems as well, because there was all the narrative that Humanoid wasn't doing well, and all of a sudden he had a resurgence when he was kind of performing the same all the time.
Yeah, I mean that existed, but I'm just saying that I don't think this actually ended up having a tangible effect on them.
If you notice, it's already a problem. Like here's one of the issues I see with the Riot broadcast is it's not anything to do with the talent level of the people working on the broadcast. It's the paradigm that they exist in. So I've made this point a million times over. One of the reasons why I think I will always have a place in the League of Legends scene, despite the fact I have no plans to ever become an expert about League of Legends, is because the way I think and I set up conversations actually just produces way more interesting discussions. Whereas one of the things that I can't handle that is still done to this day is where you tell the story of a player's form using his team's form. That is cancer to analysis. Because that approach tells you what every moron on Reddit thinks, which is that, like, for example, every player on Misfits must have been shit this year individually.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, guess what? Fnatic are right. Every player on Fnatic must be really good. Whereas that actually gives you not only no real analysis of the players on Fnatic or Misfits, but because of the way it's a conclusion, that sounds like the end point of a discussion that hadn't even begun. You hadn't even got to step one of the discussion, but you've ended it already. It's just a totally worthless way of analysing games. And the broadcast themselves have a big problem with doing that, where when they're making it like, oh, and he's on the rise again. It's like, you mean he played XL and Rogue this week? What are you talking about? Like, this is just nonsense. Like obviously that's one of my classic triggers. I can't handle the ones where in LCS you play C9 and TSM 1 week, you go 0-2, then you beat like Dignitas. Oh, and they're back on the rise. Like, you aren't. You're playing different teams. They're different teams. Like,
True.
I don't know how many years I have to say that for.
No. I mean, when you said the XL Rogue thing, there was like an exact example of that this year. No, I think it was Vitality. Vitality suddenly on the rise again because they just played like XL and stuff. But I actually really strongly agree with your point, and it did remind me of some other thing. I think maybe the only thing that's good about the league system itself is that it gives rookies a long time to flourish. Because otherwise, it would be almost impossible for players like Humanoids to get the tangible results that they will eventually get to prove the broadcast wrong. You know, in a tournament system, they would just be out like almost immediately. If it was an open circuit tournament system, and they would just have multiple tournaments where they just bomb out. You know, that's a lot harder to come back from than over the course of an entire league, like making the sort of narrative that you come back as a rookie. So maybe there's an argument that the league system itself actually helps to counterweight a lot of these fan perception issues. That may be one of the only instances where I would actually praise the league system over an open circuit system, though. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that point in as well.
By the way, as a quick aside, you know something I realised the other day? One of the tricks I've used is when I get sick and tired of people arguing against me using fallacious logic, a nice little trick to do is stop for a second, accept all of their premises, and then look at the scenario. So you ready, right? We're going to accept every premise that Fnatic's team and their fans say. Now, Fnatic's team, I'm already going to have to put an asterisk and say, for the purpose of this premise, I'm going to say Fnatic's team, but that's actually a lie. Because, for example, when Bwipo and Youngbuck say there is no system in Fnatic, they should turn to their teammate Reckless and argue with him, not us. Reckless is the one himself who said it. So ignoring the whole semantic argument, but let's imagine Fnatic, like their fans, believe this whole system thing is an elaborate conspiracy to talk shit on Fnatic, right? Because it's a way to explain that they're good as a team, but not as good individually, which of course is anathema to the way a moron thinks about the game. So let's go into the moron's world. Come on, deep into the moron. Right, everyone lower your IQ points, 20 to 30 points here. Put on an orange and black scarf of some kind. Put your hair into a ponytail for this part. Whatever, you see what I did there. Yeah, right, so this is the premise, okay? Fnatic has all good players. Their jungler's really good, perhaps the MVP. They've got a mid laner who, because he's not pure shit, is absolutely fine, apparently. They've got Bwipo, who now is really good. He's a pretty good top laner. Reckless is the best ADC. Don't even have a problem saying that. Hylissang might even be the best support. If not, he's very close to the best support. They've got a complete team. They've got an amazing coach, one of the most winningest coaches in history. The Org has supported many, many teams over history. They're one of the top teams right now. What's your excuse for losing to G2? Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak up? Because every player's great. Every player's great. The system's great. The coaching's great. The Org's great. What's the excuse for losing to G2? There's not going to be one, is there? Except that you're inferior. So I'm going to accept your premise. You are inferior. There you go. Because you know what? I actually don't think it's reasonable that this Fnatic team should beat G2 Veteran. There's nothing to forgive even. They shouldn't beat G2. You know what? By the way, if they did beat G2, I'd give them insane plaudits, which, by the way, they wouldn't get if they were equally as good as players. You see how that works again? Yeah, this is what morons never get. You actually invalidate your own team when you over-evaluate those players, dumb fucks. No, you ruin it for your own team.
This was a complaint that I had, actually, is that it was almost impossible for me to talk, frankly, about the improvements that Nemesis had made because so many people had, overrated Nemesis like fuck over the course of the spring split. So now you can't talk about how much he's improved in summer. That kind of shit, these people don't realize that they're doing, it's insane that players can work around their deficiencies the way that they do. And that's actually a praise on them.
Of course.
But I mean, I don't know. We're not allowed to talk about that stuff, apparently. It's really nuts.
Whatever. Anyway, thanks for the topic, mate.
Cheers. Have a one.
Yeah.
So Kira here has a topic that goes, I would like to discuss how the G2 team will affect the individual player's place in history, in particular, Perks and his legacy.
Yeah, so basically, the premise as it is I think this G2 roster might be the most stacked, one of the most stacked Western rosters ever. And a lot of my premise comes from one of your points, Thorin, that I originally heard it in your talking about LEC career, where you talk about all-time great players that you also played with and how that makes winning championships and your burden on carrying the game a lot easier. And I think one of the big problems I assess with G2 is the burden of carrying a game is so spread across the very, very, very strong individual players.
Sure.
So I think, and the reason this particularly goes for G2 for Perks is at the end of that Worlds, I actually think personally that Perks played better at the Worlds than Caps did. And then Perks then moved on to the mid lane, and we never got to see the continuity of that play, that level of play that he had reached. So that's basically it. I was just kind of wanting to see how you think about it a little bit.
Sure.
Well, I actually completely agree that I think Perks did better than Caps at that Worlds. I think a lot of people have forgotten the performances that Caps had at that Worlds, the EDG games, for example. They were essentially playing catch-up relative to mid lane for the whole game, and that was the set where Bwipo really came in form and really became the pivot point of Fnatic for the rest of the tournament. Because Caps had a really strong set versus Cloud9, and that's all most Western people remember. Because let's be real, most of them skipped the quarterfinal match of EDG versus Fnatic. They've even heard of fucking EDG. As no, this team never makes it past into a deep run. But yeah, he didn't have a good performance. And obviously he's playing against a certain caliber of mid laner, but in the end, Perks ended up playing against a similar caliber. He actually played against Rookie and had a better showing, in my opinion, versus Rookie than Caps did. And he played against similar level of players like Scout and actually destroyed them. I think Perks had a very good world championship compared to Caps. And yeah, we don't talk about it anymore because he's an AD carry now. So I really don't disagree with you in that sense. I'm interested in the first thing that you were saying, where you were talking about because I want to know if I understand it correctly. Are you basically implying that because the carry potential is spread across all 5 members of current G2, that we're not going to have like a standout star coming out of it, or
No, I kind of mean it, and like, so I'll give like 2 examples from Europe, and like Froggen teams, if like Froggen fucks up or gets behind, that's it, like game's over. There isn't any other big carry threat on the team. Like Froggen has to be particularly careful with the resources that are invested into him, because they're invested into him with the understanding that he will carry the game. The other one for this would probably be like Forgiven. Like in Forgiven's teams, particularly the SK team, like Forgiven had to be unbelievably like careful and way positioned and how he played team fights because of how like the nature of his role within that team. And so when I look at G2, like I see like a multitude of players that, even if, like, for example, if Caps has like a bad game, you know what I mean, Wonder could like pop off and just plow through like 3 towers. Yeah, and he's done that way before. Like, and then like I think in the spring particularly, both you and Thorin have both said it, for a person transitioning and doing a role change, Mickey X is the perfect support player to have in your lane, because you, first of all, you actually learn so much from having him there, because you aren't as punished so deadly by the other bot lanes, because he can make up for your mistakes. But the other thing is, you can also like is like a crutch for like hiding your own weaknesses. So I think it comes along the ways of that, and this entire team is like glued potentially by what might be like the greatest, like probably one of the best Western junglers I've ever had. Like, he's an unbelievably mechanically skilled, like very good decision making like jungler.
I would say that like the way that the broadcast narrative talks about G2 is going to matter a hell of a lot more for the legacy of these players than almost anything at this point. Because most of the players, like you're saying, the baton can just be passed to them and they can be expected to carry for this leg. And most of them will have carry performances by the end of the World Championships, I'm very sure. All of them had at least one big standout game in Spring Split this year, for example. So the reason people are talking about Jankos now, I don't think is because Jankos has just so much being obviously better than the rest of G2. It's because Grabs brought him up. It's because the broadcast brought him up. It's because we brought him up on the show. The reason Mickey gets talked about, I think, is because like we bring him up on the shows, blah, blah, blah. I think this is probably going to be a first example of a team where everyone is so good that people... The fan perception of it is really going to be dictated by whatever the casters and the analysts end up thinking, because it's very difficult to identify when so many players have so many strong carry performances. Who is the standout guy? Who what is the name we're going to remember out of all of this? I do think that thinking of Perkz as a mid laner is going to be dead the moment that they win Worlds. If they win Worlds, obviously. But if they do win Worlds, I think that we'll never think about Perkz as a mid laner again, unless he like swaps back and tries to win on 2 different Worlds, which would be almost completely unheard of.
If I had to guess, I already sort of see it now. Yeah. I think the main problem will be the fact that people will overrate all the players in G2, because you won't see their flaws in the way that you would if they were on even the exact same player on a different team. So I can already tell you a sort of smaller scale version of this, which is if anyone watched League of Legends in Season 2 and Season 3, I even said back then, I couldn't believe how much people overrated individually the players of Moscow 5. It was unbelievable. Because this was a team where it's like, think about it logically, guys. If Darian really was some genius top laner and Genja was the best ADC, why would they be behind and having a team fight their way out like fucking legends? They wouldn't. Because if you think about it, right, they had one of the best mid laners. They had an absurdly the best jungler who literally was like changing the game, right? If you have those advantages and you're getting behind and you are losing, like, what the fuck do you think's happening in this game? Like, what you've done is, it's the same. I gave you the same story. I've said this many times. It's the reason. The same thing happened in Korea with the Griffin team, where they were just too absurdly good at team fighting from behind. And so when they were the best team, everyone told me all the players except the top laner were the best. It's like, it's not plausible. So the problem is, G2's is a bit different, because in theory their players could all be the best. It's just that in a weird way, this will sound bizarre, because it's hard to like judge people this way, but it just doesn't take as much from most of them to win as it would if they were on a lesser team. So unfortunately, by default, if someone like Hylissang plays as well as he does, I'll probably always slightly nudge him over Mickey X in that scenario, because it's just going to take so much more from him than it does Mickey X in that scenario. And that might sound tough to Mickey X, but you know what? If you don't want it to sound tough, you go to a fucking broken team and carry them to the top. As soon as you do that, mate, I'll be giving you the MVP award.
I will gladly give Hylissang the MVP award, but I'm obviously sort of the opinion that Mickey X is better. There are arguments to be made, though. Like, I think Hylissang, for example, I know is like a really big communicator for Fnatic, you know, and Mickey X has never been that. So it's more likely, if you want to plug and play support, that Hylissang will be it for more teams than Mickey, you know. But I want to say two things on like your Moscow 5 point. I actually had a really similar answer to the one that you just had very recently when I was ranting about super teams on stream, because yeah, Moscow 5 was basically, they had an absurdly game changer of a mid-jungle duo, right? And their side lanes were essentially irrelevant in that regard. Like, they could get so many combinations of side lanes as long as they followed the plan, right? And when I was having this one, someone actually linked me, and I'm really hoping that guy is on stream actually, because it would be really nice to have linked me a clip of Darian literally being asked like how he could play like all of these weird champions in top lane, right? And Darian just said, because it doesn't fucking matter, the whole game is about mid jungle. That's literally what he
fair
said.
play that you even said
like,
that then, yeah.
Straight up he just said that. It's like, yeah, like that, but that's literally, yeah, that's absolutely true. He can do the fucking shit if he wants, so long as he just plays relative to his mid-junglers. Mid-jungle were the best mid-jungle duo of those three big teams. And the second thing is that the real mind-blowing example I thought you were going to go to, Thorin, because like I think generally speaking, talent level on Moscow 5 as individuals was higher than their rivals. CLG EU had some dog shit players.
You know what's great, Veteran?
Yeah.
What's great is, this is what people don't realise. The reason why I, from day one, had Froggen so highly rated is the same thing. When I used to watch that team, I used to be like, these players better have been good a few years before I started watching, because some of these players are dreadful. And I had motherfuckers telling me dumb shit, like that Yellow Pete was some top player, because in season 2, when AD Carry was the most broken shit ever, he could sit miles out of range and spam Cogmore. Like, am I missing something here? Like, I would like that role. If I was dying tomorrow from a terminal illness, I want a time machine and to go back and I'm going to play AD Carry in CLG EU and we're going to win Worlds in OGN. Like, is this a joke?
Yes. No, but like,
this is a Band-Aid team, for fuck's sake.
I actually, and I'm pretty sure this guy's being in my Discord party as well, I actually occasionally just tease Kelsey, but the most triggering thing that I can ever say to Kelsey, and I say this to her a lot, is I just remind her that Yellow Pete shit on Wage Out Worlds. Because obviously, like, it was the team that did, and the team Spencer's mid lane. But I really love reminding her that the person she thinks is the best AD carry ever lost to Yellow Pete every time at an international tournament.
By the way,
mattered.
That's even a factor I would even add in as to why I believe Froggen as a player is ruined in terms of knowing what good teammates are, because he was only in 2 real teams ever. He was in CLG EU, where the lesson of his career is accept weak players, because if you accept them completely, maybe they'll be viable, or he went and got all the solo queue players. He didn't actually. He was unable to get JWoww and the other players he wanted, but he tried to. Yeah. He tried to go, right, well, that didn't work. Fuck these guys. Let's go get the mechanical players, shall we? Yeah. First of all, he didn't even get that. He had to get a weird compromise team. Yeah. He made them the best anyway. And then the lesson was like, well, that doesn't work either. So to him, he was like, well, fuck it. I'll just take money and a nice career from now on. Yeah. Like, he never was... this guy never... It's the same reason, by the way. You can track the same thing with Forgiven. He had so many busted up teams until he finally got in a position where he maybe could have had a good team, that by then he was ruined as a fucking player anyway. Like, as a teammate and player, you're just done at that point in time. There's a reason why a lot of the great players who have amazing careers, in a way, kind of lock into a really nice team early on. Like, I'd like to have seen Reckless if he'd have had to go through playing at the bottom of LCS for a few years. Yeah, or if fucking Bjergsen hadn't have gotten that pick up to TSM and had to grind his way out like NateDOhDoubleG would. I think they'd be very different players. And I'm not hating on them as players. I'm just saying the environment you're in shapes you as much as just who you are as a person, you know.
Here's something that, like I do kind of want to see the Reckless thing. I feel like I feel like whenever you say that, the only like high IQ argument I've ever heard against it is that we actually saw him and Shook on Copenhagen Wolves for a while, and he actually looked insane on that. But this is the point where the league started becoming a league, so actually all of the good teams were like out, and you're basically saying that they won a rudimentary version of Challenger Series back then. I have to say though, on this like bad team premise, and this will tie in really well to our perception thing, right? With the perception of how G2 will be like overrated somewhat. All of their players will inevitably be overrated, guys. Like that will happen. A lot of them will be considered like best of all time. The big example, and why I wanted to bring up CLGU, is I can never forgive Yellow Pete. Never. For acquiring so many votes that he goes to All Stars and double lift. And Double Lift in the interview will then say, wow, the level of AD in Europe is so bad. I heard so many good things about Yellow Pete, and he did nothing. Like, in interviews, he was saying that. I can never forgive Yellow Pete for acquiring enough votes to go there and give the worst display to a role that is right now incredibly strong in Europe, but was way stronger then than he was saying. Like, forgive him was already a known factor at this point, for example. Like, I can never forgive him for that. And that's a perception thing. And that will inevitably happen with G2 players. This version of G2 will get so good at working together that when a lot of these guys are no longer on their peaks, this version of G2 will still be winning games and will still be rating very highly. And then eventually we'll get to a point where we're surprised when some of these guys go to other teams and they're not as good anymore. Like, they will get off their peak at some point, guys, but our perception of them will not necessarily change. And
by the way, the time period Veteran's talking about now, like already in season 2, he wasn't that sick a player, but season 3 especially, he was a bomb. It's not as though we're being unfair to the era, like, but you're talking about like years ago to now. No, in season 3, there was a player, you can go and look him up now, you might think it's a meme, I'm not joking right now. There was a Polish player called Creaton, who was about 5 times the player that Yellow Pete was, as a carry. This guy was like the European double lift. He was a stud mechanically. Unfortunately, he had a very bad mentality. Like, he wasn't a guy who was super dedicated, and a bunch of those teams from the Polish team had a lot of problems in their own manner anyway. He also fucked his wrist up, unfortunately, but he could have been like 10 times the player. So that whole thing just tilts me generally, because you're right, like the early teams all had this problem, but it's still going to continue now. Unfortunately, the G2 one, I'm not as mad at, because it's one of the only times when, here's the thing, they will be overrated, but the difference is they also could, in theory, be the best at the same time.
Yeah, that's
if people can't get that premise, that's just your own flaw and not understand the difference between like the true absolute best and being the best now. You know.
Yep, I'm just worried that the narrative will stick with them even when they aren't the best. You know, like that's the worry.
Yeah, like if this G2 team goes on to actually win this World Championship, and they were the first team to win the 2 domestics, MSI, Worlds, you know what I mean? The Grand Slam, that's what people call it. Like, all these players, like, when you like compare them to their peers, I think they're going to just get like absolute morale boosts. Like, Mickey X is going to be like put so much higher than people maybe like Yellow Star and Mithy, who have got these massive like careers and credentials just outside of what's in the server. And he's instantly going to get like boosted like all the way up, because the article that gets written is going to say, and he won World and 2 domestic splits, and he was part of the greatest Western team of all time. Like, it's going to be so much bullshit, and you're just going to see it absolutely everywhere. It'll be like the same for like Wonder and like Top Lane when you compare him to his peers, and like Perks eventually when you compare him to his as well.
Absolute full-on honesty, mate. If G2 win Worlds, I lose a lot of interest in being a coach, because I fucking agree with you. Like, if you're the first European team to win Worlds, hell, if you're the first team to win Worlds from a major region with no Koreans, like, your team is going to be overrated for the rest of time. You're always going to have been the first team to have done this, and you're always going to have been insane in every way, shape, and form. But if G2 takes that now, I lose so much interest in being an LEC coach, because honestly, you can't be that anymore. You can't just have by default be bigged up in history forever. Like,
and if somebody else does it, like the person who done it first is always going to get like the massive credit. Even if it's a more competitive like era later on, and there's like better teams. Yeah, exactly. It's going to absolutely fuck the history books.
Yeah, 100%. That's how you game history, guys. That's how you game your
just
legacy.
do it first.
100%. Yeah, no, do it first. Be first. That's how history matters. You'll always be written somewhere if you're first.
Which is actually a little bit quite good, because the League of Legends community is a bit like a safe one. At least they don't actually like hang on to the very first World Championship. Like some folk do it, and like, they're just stupid. They can just fuck off. But like most people actually agree that it's not actually
the consensus now. Seems like we should ignore it.
Like,
I think most people agree.
The other game, obviously, I know this is off topic, but as an analogy, you look at something like Dota 2, where the fucking first international, the people hold on to that.
They still bang on about Na'Vi
yeah,
now.
mate, it's like BO1 double bracket. It was the worst fucking format I think I've ever seen at a Dota tournament, and these people like fucking pray to it at shrines and shit. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? That's bad as fuck. But thanks for
agreed. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Like, actually, the thing is, I'll even say it like this, because one thing I learned a long time ago, Veteran, especially when you've got a persona like mine, which is completely flame-proof, because people already inflame me as much as they can, so it's like, there's nothing left for them to do with me at this point in time. I love to make statements, which to me make total sense, but I know that if someone doesn't have all the context, sound totally stupid, right? So here's the statement. Are you ready? If G2 wins Worlds this year, so they'll have won the Grand Slam, they'll have won both split. I'm assuming they win the Summer Split, obviously. Yeah. Say they've won the Summer Split, the Spring Split, MSI, Worlds. Mickey X still won't be a greater player than Yellowstar.
Oh, okay. I think a lot of people would like disagree with you on that.
I don't care. Here's the thing, mate.
I'm wondering if I would.
Your career isn't about 1 year.
Yeah.
Your greatness is about excellence. And excellence is about who you are every day of your life. It's like you draw an average through someone's whole career and you see where they were. You don't just look for the one high point. You don't look for the best team result. You look for who they were as a player. Because here's one of the reasons why. If you want to make a great case that Mickey X is a greater player than Yellowstar, don't start with accomplishments. We'll end with accomplishments. Here's how it goes. When you evaluate players, you look first of all at their level of play. Then you look who they played with. Then you look what metas and what eras they played in. The last thing you look at is the accomplishments. For me, accomplishments are what you use when you have nothing left as a tiebreaker and you say, right, well, these two players were both pretty great. They were both like a lot of things. Right, okay, well, who won more championships? Well, at the end, maybe this guy won 4 and this guy won 3. If you want to use that as an arbitrary tiebreaker, cool.
Yeah.
Everyone else starts with that. Like, the idea that, like, this is the whole problem we've had with the discussion, Veteran, every time it comes up of Reckless versus Forgiven, is that to a certain type of fan, that you don't even start the discussion, because they go, well, Reckless has X championships, Forgiven has 0 championships, you can't have the discussion. Whereas anyone who knows sports knows what a ridiculous statement that is. Like the idea, like, I'll give you a football example for anyone who's watched it. If you are a fan of football, you would know it's a totally legitimate debate to ask something like, who was a greater football player? Steven Gerrard, 0 Premier League titles, or any of Manchester United's really great midfielders, many league titles. That's a totally legit discussion you can have in sports. In league, you wouldn't even be allowed to have that discussion. You would just be written off as a biased fanboy and pushed out the door, basically.
I'm trying to think, because I feel like my logic for why Forgiven is better than Reckless would actually cause me to put Mickey over Yellowstar. That's the thing.
You can do that if you want. I'm just saying for me, like, I don't think Mickey X has done it for enough years yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like, put it this way. Here's how my rationale would go. If we're looking at, like, best individual year, Mickey X is winning at the moment. There's criteria 1. He wins on that one. Problem is, if I'm looking for, like, second and third best years, Yellowstar has many years he was a very good player, mate. And you have to add in, even though this is always tough to put into individual player rankings, if you're going to add any external factors, Yellowstar has a whole bunch of those.
So I don't know how much you know about like my opinions on Mickey X in previous years though, but I've been like I had Mickey X as my only S tier support last year, for example. When he was on the bad version of Misfits. I still thought that him as an individual support player was actually incredibly good. And that's similar to how I would still rate Forgiven insanely highly, even when he had like that Gambit period, that Origin period, but the Origin period in the LEC, like all of that stuff. Like that's why I feel like the logic for me kind of then leads me more towards Mickey than Yellowstar. I'm trying to think in terms of like relative strength now, because how far ahead was Yellowstar in Europe at the time versus how far ahead was Mickey in Europe at the time in those years? Like that's what I'm trying to think now. But trying to remember the other supports is really hard, because honestly the role was so garbage when Yellowstar was there, so Yellowstar could stand out really fucking easily, you know? So like, these are all the things I'm thinking. I've never considered this argument before. It's actually really interesting. I might actually do like a bit about it at some point.
I would just say it as a general rule, because I've done many articles that are ranking articles and the rest of it. The trick is this, right? I learned this formula years ago, and it will always help you. Because whenever you do like a top 10 players of X quality, you're always going to run into some that are super questionable. It doesn't matter how much of an expert you are. There'll always be one where it's like, should this guy be 6 or 7? You know, like you're always omming around. So the trick is this. Before you start, think abstractly about every criterion and then evaluate them all, rank them all, then do the writing. Because that actually then helps you solve all the ties, basically. Because if you know in advance what you should take as an abstract, also it'll mean you'll never be inconsistent. Like you'll never rank one guy 5th for one reason that would have made the other guy 7th. You know, like it's just a trick you do beforehand. Because otherwise, if you do it the other way around, you basically eventually for the ties going to have to do this process anyway. It's just that at the end, what you won't notice is if at the end you come down, right, I'm going to grade this criterion a higher ranking than this one. Well, what if you then didn't do that for the number 2 guy or something? So just a little trick for people out there. No one does it, sadly, but it's something I figured out a while ago. Right, so Michael here has a topic. It goes like this. He says, the new tiebreaker rules are worse and just ruin potential storylines, as well as removing the most enjoyable matches for the lower tier teams / removal of relegation makes it so that it is never worth to watch certain bottom tier teams during the split. Okay, so expand on that a little bit for us.
All right, I'll start with the second point. So, for an example, I used to like watching the relegation bracket or the games leading up to it, because I wanted to gauge, like, well, is this team really gonna relegate or not? So I actually had a reason to turn into the games that those teams were playing. And now when you're looking at, I don't know, XL right now, for an example, like their games are absolutely boring, in my opinion. I personally have no reason to watch them, and you know, if you tell me they would be shipped off and you will never see them again, I wouldn't care for that. So I think that they have no relevant matches. It's like the most relevant matches that those teams have are when they upset a team, and that's like the most impact they have on the league at all. And
So on that point, that first point he makes there, basically, Veteran, is another example of why I don't really want to hear people from North America who have no clue about European sports telling me that relegation isn't interesting.
Yes.
Because they haven't watched any fucking sports with them. Because everyone knows in the Premier League, there are 2 races you watch. The race for Europe and the race for relegation. And that's the whole reason why those sports are always interesting. Because like the only place, basically, that's boring is to be in the middle. And quite frankly, if you're in the middle, you're at least going, thank fuck I'm not in relegation. Like, there's always a reason to care. The Americans never got this because they're so dumb. They started without it and they were like, well, if we haven't got it, then it must be the best for that. It's like, brilliant. That's fucking tautology, but okay. So, what do you think about this, Veteran? Does it actually affect LEC for you?
So okay. So for me personally, it doesn't. But you know what else you get when you have like people watching for the second race? You have spillover into the people watching Division 1 because they want to see the people who are potentially going to face. Viewership for EU Masters has actually been going down with each subsequent split. It's not just, oh, well, that Origin Moss isn't there anymore, therefore it goes down. No, it's been going down pretty regularly. There isn't really an incentive for a new viewership to come in if you're not potentially watching the competitors to XL, to SK, to all these guys who are in relegation. And I actually think the rookie scene loses a lot of potential viewership by the fact that relegation is not there anymore. Not just because of the matches themselves, where obviously even if they lost, they would get a little bit of exposure, but because there's no incentive to watch the division below hand, where previously would actually have a dramatic impact on the division that you normally watch, which is the LEC. Like, that spillover doesn't exist anymore. So I actually really agree that I think it's a horrible decision. You also reminded me a little of the caller, by the way, like reminded me a little of the people who kind of want like a 4th place runoff or like a lower place runoff for like international worlds, right? Like, people want more matches. People want reasons to care about the middle of the pack teams. People want to see more matchups from them, but ones with meaning, you know? Like, an international event is the one that they ask for, not like a runoff between each other for like 5th, 6th, etc., because they want to see how good the middle of the pack in Europe are versus middle of the pack in like China, for example. They don't give a flying fuck who is 5th or 6th in Europe. You never see that. and you remove the meaningfulness of these teams playing when you remove relegation. So yeah, like I fully agree with you, and I do regret that the spillover aspect doesn't exist. I don't hear about the spillover aspect talked often enough, but I think it is actually having a tangible effect on viewership in the rookie scene. So.
Well,
what was the first point again? Did you want to go into that one now?
Yeah, well, I can. Well, I first off wanted to touch on that. For an example, they tried to make something for the regional leagues that they are more attractive, but I haven't seen work at all, and I don't know what they expected how that would work out. Is that you have Misfits Premier or something like that, but they have a team in the regional league that somehow should attract some more people because you see the name played, Misfits.
Well, I have to ask you then, because you're here with like a G2 jersey. It's nice to see that. It's a Fnatic one for once. Have you watched a single game of G2 Heretics?
No, I have not.
No, you haven't. Okay, so we have a hardcore fan here. Apparently, the spillover does not exist for him, so you can speak very authoritatively on this.
I personally, when I watch, I want to watch the highest level of League of Legends possible, and I can't be bothered to watch I can't possibly imagine that for me as a pleb, the middle of the pack of the secondary league will be interesting when the bottom of the LEC is already like clown fiesta.
I can think of one scenario where it would work though, which is at least if a player gets put down to the academy team, at least you might watch that. Like obviously it's not going to happen in G2 because obviously none of their players would be. But let's imagine that they had actually decided to permanently go with Dan over Broxer and they put Broxer on the academy team. That'd be a reason to watch academy. It's not exactly a standard one. I mean,
but then we would turn into like NA and recycle like nameplate players and put them in the leagues that are supposed to be to bring up rookies, and that's something I'm not like. I like to listen to someone like Veteran talking like that's a rookie, and then I'll look at some games or some highlights of that player. Like I might watch 1 or 2 games and then I'll be like, well, his team's shit. so I can't see. Well, I don't have the finesse to see. Well, this is why he's good or something. Or, well, if it's obvious, I can, but,
I would be really interested, actually, if Hans Sammer playing that one best of 5 in the French league actually impacted viewership on that particular game, relative to how Misfits was normally being watched. Like, I'm also interested if anyone in the chat is a Misfits fan, if you actually watched the Misfits LFL game just because Hans Sammer was in it, because I honestly kind of doubt it when I think about it. Like, I guess people would like to see the novelty factor, at least, of like Yankos in Spanish league, I bet that would attract people, but I feel like that wouldn't really work in like the long term. And I do say that, but there is literally like a streamer team in the LFL right now, so quite clearly there's viewership for it. But I'm actually really curious to look into that now that Thorin's brought that up.
What was the first?
The first point was that they have changed the tiebreaker rules so that when you have an equal record, then you will no longer play a tiebreaker, but it will be considered
whoever got the most victories in the second half.
Exactly. Yeah. And for an example, what was for the bottom teams the most important games was the relegation games. For the middle of the pack, like the most important games are tiebreakers, because that gives you even the possibility to get to Worlds. So you get like you win the tiebreaker, you get into the group stage, and then you get Worlds points, which would possibly allow you to make a deep run if you're lucky.
Yeah,
I'll give you a great counterpoint that immediately should be obvious. So in NA, when Team Liquid was the top team, as a joke, they played an all Glacials comp. They won the game, by the way. Yeah. In EU, G2 multiple times picked troll picks. Some of those games they won. You're making these games the most important ones for the people who are at the bottom of the league.
Oh, I'm very unhappy for G2
like
doing
in a
that.
world in which that can happen, because by the way, there's nothing stopping those teams. It's up to them what they choose to do. You're now making those games explicitly more important. The ones that buy to some of those teams might not matter as much. I realise that might sound abstract because they might think, well, you don't have to troll. Yeah, but if they are going to troll, that's going to be when they're going to do it. It's the point.
No, but if you troll, the idea of LEC or competing in very high ranks is that you should try every game or to play the best, or well, you may not be as invested as other people. As like, for an example, I don't know.
I can counterpoint that actually. I think it's not so much that like you could troll if you want. It's that not only do you not have to take it seriously because like G2 obviously had like a top 2 point secure, but G2 are incentivized not to reveal as much as possible on every game. Like a long-term league is an information game, and G2 don't want to give away unnecessary information. Lord knows there's enough VODs right now that a lot of teams could be learning from. Why would G2 want to add to that pool? So you are somewhat incentivized once you get to the point where your games don't matter to actually have troll games. There are plenty of teams that will have these discussions and plenty of players that will realize this. So that would be my counterpoint to that. There is no explicit reason for them to play to win every game. Like getting the 18-0 is really nice for your ego, but you also lose out on the information game when you're doing that in a scenario where you don't have to.
Oh, that's true, yes. But I mean, you don't have to reveal, like, you don't have to try your hardest and reveal all your hidden picks. You can just, you can just play standard. Whoever believes that playing Soraka top lane Smite is anywhere close to what you should be playing is an idiot. Or I don't know, Garen top lane.
It's nowhere. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's nowhere near. Like if you
you should at least try to stay within the meta.
Say I play 5 more standard meta games, then you have 5 more drafts that you can tell what my priorities are within standard metas. Like, that's actually pretty fucking valuable, to be honest.
But by your own logical veteran, that doesn't dictate you have to go for an extreme troll one, though. Like, for example, based on what you've just said, actually, if someone wanted to happily compromise all positions we've just presented, here's what you do. Yep. You pick only meta champions, but you follow a different draft priority to normal, but you don't make it blatant. You just make a couple of tweaks. Like, actually, you could even use it as conditioning to set the opponent up. Like, you know what? Normally, I would pick... Let's say I'll pick a random one here. I would normally pick Pike at the spot here, but instead we'll pick whatever, Thresh instead, make it slightly different and just throw them off a little bit. But at least it'll look like a real game. It'll feel like you can still lose it if you want to just make it fun, but make it look plausible that you lost it.
I guess if I was going to do that, I would start picking top jungle, mid, AD support in order every single game, and I would just go for the next best meta champion that is up, Even then, I guess I would worry that maybe I'm just revealing what I think the next best meta champion is, so you're still somewhat losing out in the information game, and that would be the argument to just, like, outright troll it. But yeah, I could see myself just doing that.
I'll tell you the main downside is the one that I've mentioned many times. It's the real Achilles heel of everyone who ever throws a game or doesn't try, is... You want it to look like a troll game so people know it was a troll game. Yeah. The last thing you want is to pick a suboptimal champion that is in the meta, lose the game straight up, and then have fans forever in history going, remember that time he lost with... Like, no, you want them to be like, remember that time he lost with Garen? Well, that was obviously a troll pick, so who cares? Like, that's what you want them to say right after, unfortunately. So as soon as players are willing to get over their ego and just let someone think you lost WWE style, we can throw all the games we want. You can have all the stupid troll picks you want.
True.
What they should have really done, by the way, this is how you know they're not trolls. Trolling, by the way, everyone who's literally born after about the year 2000 doesn't even know what the fuck the word means. A troll was supposed to be someone who's like a troll who lives in the fairy tale under a bridge. It's a miserable person who's there to mess everything up for everyone else. Trolling isn't when you're like, haha, we're all friends, but I'm just being silly. Like, no, that's just having a prank. Like, being a troll was supposed to be the guy who would come in and they would argue just to annoy you, just to make everyone upset, just to like try and fuck the conversation. Because the joke is they were so antisocial, they couldn't take part in an oral conversation. So their only solution was ruin the conversation for everyone. So along these lines, like, it's not even trolling to do half this shit. Here's what trolling would be. Trolling would be if to this day, Youngbuck, everyone in Fnatic, well, not Fnatic, G2 rather, if Grabs Wonder to this day with a straight face said that they thought Garen was the best pick there and that they just misplayed it. That would be trolling. If you were a real troll, that's how you would troll.
True.
Now, you notice, by the way, I was able to say all of that without saying millennial because it's the most... here's the funny thing. I think the whole boomer meme's for morons as well, but I at least get it because the premise of the boomer meme goes like this. Everyone who you're calling a boomer, who obviously logistically is definitely not a baby boomer if you know the way the years work, yes, that's inaccurate. So what's going to make them upset? The fact that you called them a boomer and they're like, but I'm not, I'm like 38, whatever, right? Here's the joke. The joke is on them because they're the same cunts who've spent the last 15 years calling everyone who's 18 a millennial, which also
Yeah.
makes no fucking sense. Because, like, a millennial would actually be me, by the way. So the real irony is the person you're all calling a boomer is the millennial. But anyway, we'll leave all that to one side. I only like the meme because it essentially gets... The only person it gets mad is the person who themselves was using a shit meme that didn't work. So anyway, that's the end of today's meme review. Over to Pewdie for this one. Right, no, whatever. So do you have anything else to this topic, though, mate?
Yeah, I can add something else. Like, another point that people could bring up is that, you know, that you argued is that G2 or like that they are basically sandbagging when they start trolling. That, you know, like Vitality getting, like, you can't really make the argument that Vitality is in playoffs because of G2, but they had better odds because of it.
Oh, by the way, there's another reason why you don't want these sorts of systems. Because luckily G2 did it just for funsies and they didn't think about the consequences. Imagine living in a world in which G2 really doesn't want Origin to make the playoffs. There's the world you don't want to think about, boys. Where they go out of their way to throw the right games. Because that world, by the way, also exists. This is another thing that happened in Counter-Strike in many, many tournaments. In fact, I could even give you a really famous example from Quake, actually. One time, the number one player in the world in Quake, who was an American player, was in a scenario where to get out of the group, he just needed his rival for the tournament to win a game he should easily. Now, luckily, his rival was... We didn't know it then, soon to become legendary Russian Quake player Cooler, who doesn't give a flying fuck about PC culture and what people think. So he literally, threw the game on purpose, was even typing in the game, like, come kill me, to the opponent, who then won the match, and then literally just walked by the number one player in the world, just like smiling at him like, hey, hi. Because this guy just didn't give a fuck, but in the best possible way. So sadly, though, by the way, I will tell you, there's no way to stop any of this behaviour. The only way to stop it is you have to use a different structure. And it can't be a league structure, because a league, by the way, is just a giant round robin. The problem is every round robin format contains the same flaw, which is you get games of teams that are already out and you get games of teams that have already won. So unfortunately, whenever that's possible, you're going to get all these problems come in. So as long as they want to have a league, it's always going to exist, I'm afraid.
I mean, this stuff happens in League. Like, everyone should know this stuff obviously still happens in League. It's even, I mean, I've heard accusations of it happening this specific split. Like, yeah, people do look at the rankings and then try to game the rankings somewhat so the teams that they would rather play against go through and the teams that they would rather not play against.
There's always going to be practically one team that's borderline for the playoffs, but if they got into the playoffs, it's a game changer. They could get way better, like week on week on week, and they might even win the league. Whereas alternately, there's always a team who could make playoffs that we all know is going out immediately 0-3. So you never want to have the top team thinking, wait a minute, what happens if we lose this game on week 8? Like, you don't want them to even think of that, do you, in an ideal world?
I mean, even not like the guys I've heard that potentially did it weren't even the top team. It was just like when you're looking at who's potentially like 5th, 6th, stuff like this, like these people were thinking about that.
Are you ready for another layer of black pill that's going to make everyone really depressed?
Go on.
It's one thing if the top team does that to eliminate a rival. The Riot Championship point system incentivizes some teams to do this.
Yeah.
Like, if I can shift a team so that they're going to end up playing, especially, by the way, in the old system where you didn't pick, like, who you played in the first round. Yep. In the old one where you know that 3 plays 6, oh boy, you're opening a fucking Pandora's box of people throwing games. Of course. Like, there's actually going to be times where, as mad as it sounds, it's better to come 6th than 5th.
Yeah.
Not least if you're in a world where there's some cunts like old school Fnatic or Origin with SOAS out there who are just cruising through the split, waiting to come in with that 3rd or 4th seed, and then just rake through the whole playoffs, wrecking everyone. Like, you don't want to be stuck in the fucking, like, in the 5th seed spot when they're 4th. You don't want that, boys. That's not a world where you'd rather be 6th than try and play number 3.
No, you're absolutely right.
Because the real problem with all these systems, if you notice, is they always, because the system was designed abstractly without running it through and seeing what it'd look like, they always make assumptions that don't exist. Like, each team will treat each game as though it's identical. Each team will take each spot as though it is desirable. So they will act as though the 2nd spot will always be more desirable than the 3rd spot. But I actually just gave you a reason there as to why the 6th spot could be more desirable than 5th.
No, that happens a lot. Like a lot of teams look at that, and there are always accusations that teams are trying to game those particular spots. That happens way more than like the top team decided that they don't like this cunt, so they decided to game the system. Like.
By the way, we all know what fans and even pro players who don't have very many brain cells to rub together always say. They always go like this. But veteran, who cares who you play? You have to beat all the good teams to win the thing. Now, first of all, I'm not going to go into a whole rant because I've done this too many times. First of all, objectively on its surface, it's a totally false statement. Secondly, even if that's true, we're not talking about winning the tournament, dumb fuck. We're talking about if I come top 4 and lose to the best team in the tournament, I get the money for top 4.
Yes.
If I play them in the 5th to 8th match and come 5th to 8th, I get less money for the same performance. So I never understood why people bring that up because they always say it like they think they've got like, they say it like they're the cunt putting down that fucking Uno card that does everything. Like, can't beat this, can you? And it's like, no. I can. If anything, you've put down the +2, and I'm pulling out the Uno card that reverses the direction.
Yes.
Now you've got to, fuck you. There you go. That's the philosophy.
That's not how it works.
I
don't care how Uno works, mate.
No,
don't give a fuck how Uno works.
The example that I would give, like to
it's not actually. You just both goes the other way, right? Whatever.
But like in 2016, like obviously I didn't like that we were against ANX in the quarterfinals, but Jankos absolutely loved it. Jankos didn't love it because he was thinking, oh, this is an easier path to winning the whole thing. He absolutely loved it because he knew that 100% the prize money gets ridiculous once you're top 4 at the World Championships. And number 2, we all had it in our contracts that if we ended up top 4,
get your
we got a nice bonus.
Right?
Yes,
there you go.
Like that was free. Like that was completely free. Yeah, obviously teams, if they can get an easy 4th slot, will want an easy 4th slot. They are incentivized by their own orgs to go for that. So you do get you're incentivized to game the system a lot. I
also never understood that whole argument because I've said it 100 times. The reason ANX was in the playoffs is because they were higher than the fucking champions of Europe. What is that HUK's fault? Am I missing something? Is that HUK's fault, is it?
I mean, the reason we dodged every Korean team was because we are higher than a team and destroyed them twice in a row on the same day. That was apparently a finalist for the whole thing. That was supposed to be a finalist. Everyone was predicting that was, by the way, and had just had the most successful split in LPL history.
They're the LPL champions.
Yep, and they hadn't lost a single set.
But here's what happened.
Only winning record.
Remember, veteran, they always used to do this. Back then, the only team from China anyone would respect was whoever had Uzi Eye. So they were like, no, Royal Never Give Up is a great team. Why are they fucking pool 2 then, you dumb fuck?
Yeah.
Explain it to me. Explain it to me.
Also, the pressure probably for one of those teams to perform is probably pretty fucking high.
Sure.
And I can see that getting to people like Griffin's always like.
Oh, by the way,
joking.
When TSM players start pulling out the smallest violin in the world, like, oh, the pressure on us. Try being in a fucking Chinese or Korean team, mate. No one tells you when you lose at Worlds on TSM, tear up your passport, don't even bother coming back to live here. They just tell you, fuck off out of TSM. Like, they actually, literally, this is not a joke. It's a famous thing that they say in Korea. If they say is, if, like, when, for example, Kingzone or GE Tigers lost European tournaments, they would just say, fucking swim home, you should have your flight cancelled. And they were half joking. We'd be 100% joking if we said that on TSM.
Nice culture, I guess.
Here's something that really backs up your point, by the way, Fron. Upset said in PGL today, I have the exact quote, I would have wanted for us to finish 5th or 6th in regular season to have a chance to face Splice, because we match up better against them. Like, that just backs up your point entirely, you know? Like, there are sides of the bracket that are preferable. That would get him, like, top 3. That would put him in a really good spot.
To be fair, Upset, I also hoped Schalke wouldn't finish top 4 this split, but for different reasons, mate. Entirely different reasons.
They weren't really good, let's say it. And again, who is right now?
Sure. We all wish Origin hadn't collapsed.
Yes.
So,
but
I do as well, but now that it has happened, I do enjoy that it plays in all my shit with refresh. I just laugh at them twice as hard across 2 games. So
I've seen you
appreciate that as well
on Twitter with it.
Do appreciate that. Do appreciate that. Right, I think that's your topic down there, mate. Cheers.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, you can call me Emil. It's fine.
Right. So your topic was, why are so many players that don't pass the eye test of an outsider high elo player, how can they pass the eye test of coaches enough to actually get into teams? Is this because the coaching/scouting is bad, or is there another more important metric in play here? And then he gives 2 examples of Jack Troll and Woolite. So pretty relevant examples. Right, so let's just take the initial premise there, Veteran. It's a good initial premise. So basically, why are there pro players that you see in LEC and other leagues that if you just took the nameplate off, even like a high elo challenger player would be like, oh, he's probably plat, masters, something like they would think this player's never pro level. So how does it happen? How do you get into teams if you don't have the visual aesthetic quality test, as it were?
Okay, so in these 2, let's go with these 2 specific examples. So with Woolite, the organization needed a certain amount of Polish players for their Ultra Liga roster, right? Like the roster that we're looking at right now was their roster from the Polish league. So they brought in Woolite for that. And then obviously he has pre-existing synergy with the rest of the team and became one of their only 2 AD carries because they weren't able to snag Forgiven in the offseason, right? So then he kind of ended up being there because he kind of was necessary, or a Polish AD was necessary for them to be a Polish team, and he is a holdover from that. So basically, almost nothing to do with scouting per se, right? But that's the thing. Scouting is not necessarily the only thing that goes into building a roster. There are all these other external factors that could end up taking priority. Jack Troll had success in Giants Gaming with the rest of that roster, and that is a roster that really emphasizes the mental aspect of the game, right? And Jack Troll had pre-existing synergies of Attila that they're not really looking to disrupt until they have to. But I think Jack Troll also exists within his role largely because the typical idea of the level of support in Europe is so looked down upon that looking for alternatives isn't really there. The thing that sort of shocks me the most about Vitality's roster isn't necessarily Jack Troll, because the alternative in the academy team is Trayton, and I don't think he's that good either. What shocks me is that Schemes has been there in the LFL the whole goddamn time. That hasn't actually been looked at to replace their jungler Mowgli or Kikis when Kikis was removed, etc. Schemes is actually a pretty good jungler, and I would look internally to replace their current jungler with him. But clearly they didn't want to do that because what happened was they scrimmed the team in Korea with Mowgli in it very, very regularly, right? Like that's what everyone knows. And what happens is that players really feel the pressure that they have when they're against certain teams, right? And so the jungler felt the pressure of Mowgli, or even if that necessarily just Mowgli, it could have been the way that team was playing around Mowgli with priority, all of this kind of thing. And so on those recommendations, he ended up coming in. If you want to get in a team that way, you already have to be on the level to be scrimming that team, right? Which ends up creating kind of like a feedback loop where veteran players get recycled and rookie players don't necessarily get a look-see, because when you play against a National League team, you don't really feel pressure in almost any lane, right? So the players aren't really going to recommend those kinds of players. Your question is kind of, why isn't the scouting there? Well, I'm trying to tell you, scouting isn't the first and foremost thing that they do. Most people will generally give the authority over to the players, and the players see the good players as the ones they felt the most pressured when they played against, right? So that would be how I'd say you should model it if you want to kind of get to the crux of the problem.
So can I come in here?
Yeah. Go for it.
So the problem as I see it, and I should give my background, I guess, briefly before LS flames me for this. I used to be like 2020 ELO in Season 2, and then I was Challenger in Season 3. And, you know, I played on some professional Turkish teams in TSL, but it was very brief and not for long. So I know some things about the scene. I have some pro player friends, and I have also been Challenger myself for a long time. So that's the background.
Okay.
I guess from the examples I gave in the chat, like Jack Troll and Woolite, you have your point, right? The metric wasn't the play itself. The metric was recommendations and other
past history, all sorts.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to think of examples right now, but like, isn't it strange that at this day and age, and you know, it's 2019, that there is so much professionalism now in the scene that you would think every team would have like at least a couple of challenger players as their scouts, maybe like constantly looking at rookies and constantly checking out solo queue accounts. adding more friends. For example, I used to have like 20, 30 challenger friends that I knew who were also in the scene. So if some coach approached me, not that stuff like this didn't happen much, but if a coach approached me, I would be able to give them recommendations as to, look, this player does this, he has these tendencies, he also likes to play forward. For example, like if I had Vico as my friend, I could recommend him with giving the asterisk of he plays too far forward sometimes, and he can be Marin-esque. So basically the gist of what I'm trying to say here is, why is the scene now so advanced compared to when I was starting out? I've been playing this game basically from beta and following it.
I'll even give you a quick example. I think would be a great case. Like, this is because of what he says actually has a lot of logic. If you want to use basic scouting to get people from solo queue, I could see this as an approach. The way I would do it, this would be the ideal way. So when in Cloud9, they knew that it was time for High to leave anyway. They'd already removed him as a mid laner. They had Incarnation. And even when they brought him back, it was only to be a stopgap, to play support, to play jungle. What they should have done at that point in time is just said to High, because basically he's now already moved out of the scene anyway, and he clearly didn't want to play for loads of years. You just say to him this: while you're still, in theory, a pro-level player, you're going to be my scout. So you're going to go into solo queue, you're going to find the best talents, you're going to duo with them, so you're going to even know like what they're like on comms, if they have anything understanding the game, maybe even teach them some basic concepts, see how quick they are on the uptake. Now, if we try this guy out, before we even get to the trial, we've got actual like advanced information. We've got real scouting. That would be an amazing approach.
Sure. Yeah, and exactly. Like, so many things you can do. Like, not just this. This is a great example you gave, and you can do so many things that is just so basic and easy. You just add someone on the client and watch some games. Like, you have one guy, like, I don't know, you hire YouTube editors, right? You hire social media experts. Just hire one guy who literally sits in his house, doesn't even have to come to a physical office or something, just sits in his house, looks at people's solo queue, and this is a guy that, is someone you can trust to do this, basically. And maybe you don't have one guy, you have a couple of guys, and it's a really low cost investment as well. Like, if some team randomly just decided to pay me, for example, right? I'm here. Like some challenger US player, right? If you pay him money, and he will do this for you, like from his house. So why is this not done? It's ridiculous to me that nothing like this is done.
I'm ready to drop the black pill on you at any time, mate, about this. But like, it comes to one specific thing that you said that you can trust. How is the owner going to know when they make this hire that they can trust this guy to scout?
That's basically why I cheated with the High example, by the way. I knew I was doing that, but you keep that anyway.
They ask the players. And if the scout has a different opinion to the player's personal experience, who do you think the owner is going to defer to in that hiring?
You have a great point here, right? I understand it. But the thing that I'm suggesting could be done like this. For example, you have a preliminary process done by the guy that you hire or the guys that you hire. And they, for example, give you like, 5 players in each position for, a split. And then you do another elimination process by asking actual players on your team, or like, scratch all that. You know how Team Liquid has like TF Blade, for example, as their streamer, right? And some other teams also have affiliate challenger players. So maybe, probably Steve trusts TF Blade. I don't know. I think he does, because he defends
he does. He brings them up before he brings up his academy top laner.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen him defend them very ferociously about the Twitch stuff as well. He went to true lengths to
but as in, I remember an episode of Listen Loco where he came on, and when Thorin asked him about the academy players that he had, he brought up TF Blade, who has not played an academy game, and didn't bring up his own actual NA academy top laner, who has a very good reputation as a really strong player. Like, you have to bear in mind that he has no reason to look into those said academy players. He needs to trust what his players tell him about this. And there's a constant feedback loop happening in scrims where players who are on top teams are the players that these guys have felt pressured in scrims, because otherwise they wouldn't be scrimming them in the first place. And as a result, if you bring in any sort of, like, the system that you just said, like, would require you to actually trust a guy to build a team for a split. You said, like, I don't know, for a split, but that's the end goal. The end goal is that the scout would actually build a roster. The owner is not going to trust the scout for a split to build said roster. Like, he's going to ask the players first if this guy is full of shit or not, and it's very often the players will disagree with the scout himself, you know?
Thing is, his basic premise, though, I think has a lot of validity, which is the idea of basically they literally act like a scout, as in they go ahead of you and they look for the names before you even start the process.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I always said this years ago. It's something that, funnily enough, the first game to properly implement this is probably going to be Overwatch, believe it or not, because in the Overwatch League, they have so many Korean players, and even on teams that aren't all Korean, they have a lot of Korean players. So, as a result, finally, in 2019, people are going to implement what I told people to do in 2015, which is if you want to import players, don't wait to get the player who you know used to be good 3 years ago to your team in NA. Yeah. Get him before he becomes an LCK phenomenon out of solo queue. Have your scouts in Korea just live there ideally and all year round be just looking for talent. And if you don't use the missplit, fine. You had the option though. And the idea is in doing this process, you could one day have Caps before he's Caps in NA. You could have Chovy before he's Chovy in LCK. On your team, he could be breaking out and making all. And if you add it to the earlier discussion, you could even be moulding this guy from day one. You could be moulding Caps to fit your team, not having to get him years later when he's Febevan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's very difficult for them to get beyond that conceptual thought that you've just done for him and then check with the people that they trust. The problem is that they will always end up trusting the players and then they'll get disincentivized to do it. Do you know, I can't remember the caller's name now. Wait, can you just remind me your name? I'm sorry, I'm terrible.
It's fine, you can call me.
Emil. It's like a Swedish name, Emil.
Okay.
It's actually Jamil. It's an Azerbaijani name, but Emil is fine.
Whatever. Jamil then. There you go.
Yeah,
Jamil. Okay. For example, oh fuck, I've fucking forgotten the example. Why do you think DOS got hired?
I assume he was duo queuing with Hans, and he was before the process actually in contact with some of the Misfits players and the org maybe.
He was rank 1. That's it. They trusted the fact that he was rank 1, and therefore they hired him.
Let me win trade with you. I need to be rank 1 for Saturday. Let me win trade with you. I'm number 1, right? Yes, I got it. Thanks. Right, I'll pay you.
You know, he actually got rank 1 because you duo queued with Hans, right?
No, he was rank 1 before then. Well, he got rank 1 for various reasons, which I will not necessarily go into. That were to do with geo queuing, yes. But the fact that he was rank 1 is why he got started on the LEC, right? Like, that's the only reason that he got started was because of that. And that's because that's something tangible that they can trust outside of just watching the games and trying to figure out who is going to be the best support. That will always be up for debate. And once you present that debate to the players, who are the only other people that the owner can trust, the players will generally disagree. Because if you face an all-National League team, you feel no pressure when you play against this support. I can say to these guys that Labrov is insane as much as I want, very few of them will take that as a fact. In fact, the only AD carries who I've talked to at professional level who agree with me on Labrov are the ones who have played with him. But getting to the step where you will actually play with him is very far down the line for people. That's why you see so many people get imported in before we even look at these kinds of up-and-coming talents. And you'll always see that. Because the people who are being imported in, they've probably scrimmed against international tournaments, or Perks has, and Perks has then told everybody that, this guy's insane, you know? You can't... I haven't been presented with a solution yet to get around this particular problem, that whenever these owners who have to spend the money do their fact-checking, they will have to fact-check the people who essentially scrim in an echo chamber. And they always will. How do you get past that feedback loop? My solution is to build a brand for me where my brand is literally, I know this shit. And if that gets big enough, then they have to fucking listen to me first.
By the way, I know obviously that guy's Danish, the DOS guy or whatever, but what an unfortunate name you've picked. Because if you don't know in English, colloquially, a DOSer is like a fucking homeless cunt who's just living in a shit life and just has nothing going for them whatsoever. not to be confused with a tosser, which is something very different. Right, anyway. Okay. Do you have anything else on this topic, Jamil?
I guess if you guys have the time, I can share with you a very brief story of.
Yeah, come on.
All right. So, as I said, I started playing the game when it was in closed beta. I was very highly ranked in season 1, 2, and 3, but then I kind of stopped playing, and now I just watch all the competitive games and from time to time I play the game too. So what happened to me, and this is why I wanted to talk about this topic actually, because it is something that I despise in the scene, basically, the lack of scouting. So when I was really highly rated in Challenger in both US and in Turkish servers, I actually had the chance to join a Turkish team called Dark Passage. And if you guys know anything about the Turkish scene before there was a TCL, I mean, there was a TCL then too, but it was something else.
This was like the best team or whatever, right?
Yeah, Dark Passage was basically the regional SKT in Turkey. They were dominating for 4 splits in a row. And so before the domination began, there was a player named Longq, right? And I had the chance to join this team because I was in talks with their scout. But actually, a player that I was on a team with in my home city rather, contacts this scout, tells him to not recruit me because he needs me on his team in the region that I live in.
This is nice.
The shooter team by
Machiavellian. This is good. Keep going.
Yeah, he tells him to not recruit me, and so I don't join this big team, and so I don't make it as a player, and so I just drop esports altogether because of this, and I'm now a lawyer. So this is like a very personal story for me. So I actually am really sad that in 21 was it? When was I?
Okay.
2013.
Yeah.
In 2013, Turkey. The system that was in play in 2013 Turkey is the same system in play in 2019 Europe, which is what.
Here's the problem, mate. Here's the problem. I was loving that story right up until the last part, where at the end, you know, like in stories in English, people sometimes go like, and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, eventually I got the job, you know, like they skip over part of it. Yours went like this. You go like, so I had a chance to join this top team in my region, and then this guy that I knew basically sort of like he did espionage, you know, he tricked them into not hiring me. So anyway, as a result, I quit the game entirely and I became a lawyer. So isn't that fucked up? It's like, no, because the problem with that is, right, the only good ending to that story where we're still with you at the end goes like this. So they didn't pick me up. So then I went actually to the third best team and I made them the best and I beat them in the qualifier. And eventually they asked me to join and I said, fuck you. And that was a sick story. Instead, your story ended like this. Like in the end, I just quit the game completely because my one chance to make it didn't make it. So I justified everything that they probably thought about me that I would not be the right pickup because I'm just a little bitch who just quit out the first chance he got. It's like, oh, did things not go perfectly my way? Mummy, I thought there'd be a pony at my party. Where is the pony? The pony is black. I thought the pony was supposed to be pink. What is this? And you just kick all your own friends out. You know, I'm not hating on you. I'm just saying, like, the story would have been way cooler at the end if you made it, you know. Like, and the premise was good. The premise was good.
Yeah, bro, but you have no clue at actually what the Turkish scene looked like at the time. To get into contact with these people, I had to literally travel miles from my city to go to their gaming house, wait outside of it, and meet them in person. Like, there was no chance of contacting any team.
Holy shit. They actually ran, in the Turkish scene, Veteran runs like those old, like apocryphal stories of like the wise masters in Nepal, where you travel there. Sir, I have traveled over 2,000 miles. I'm very hungry. I just wish to come in and become a monk. They go away. You will never make it as a monk. And you just stay on the doorstep, sitting there, go, spring, summer passes, winter, you're all frozen, you're almost dying. Yes, you have passed the test. You may come in now. Like, your story's actually as ridiculous as that. This is like the 21st century. What are you talking about? Why do you have to travel so far? You had Skype and everything. What's going on?
Something I will have to say to you, mate, is like, I took issue with one of the first things you said, where you said that the scene got a lot more professional. No. The illusion of professionalism has gotten a lot better than the illusion of professionalism back then. But it is still just that. There's nothing actually practical about aspiring to professionalism in the way that most teams do. And as a result, the system itself is fucking designed to be aids to actually get into. You know, like the system is against you at every single stage, and you can't give up on the first turn if you want to make it here. And that's just a fact of life in most senses, by the way. The illusion of professionalism wins out over the actual effective uses of professionalism. And that can, like, that's why it is functionally speaking still the same as in 2013, because functionally speaking it is. They just have like a lot more people with titles, and they've made it a lot harder to filter through the fat to get what you want. If anything, it's gotten harder for the right people to get into the right place right now than it was back then. And anybody here who is trying to like get in, yeah, you will fail the first few times. You are against everybody else, not just the people also trying to get the job, but the people hiring you. Like, every aspect of this system is your enemy, and you have to have that attitude. Otherwise, you're not going to make it, and you will be disappointed at some point, because none of these guys are here to make sure that you get in on the basis of your talent. None of these guys are here for that whatsoever. There is not a guy hired for that. Otherwise, you would have scouts everywhere, and they would actually know their shit. But instead, we're just waiting for someone to hit rank 1 on the ladder.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's.
By the way, here's also the way you actually make. Here's the final chapter to that story you had earlier. I'll tell you how you turn it all around. Okay. Here's the director's cut. There's a little epilogue after that story.
Oh.
What you do? So you became a lawyer, right? Are you a lawyer now?
I'm actually a master's student, but I'm also
okay.
I don't know how to say it in English. Practicing lawyer. I don't know what the word.
Okay.
But
so here's the thing, right? I know for a
intern.
fact that within the Turkish scene, esports in Turkey is an absolute train wreck of terrible contracts that sometimes wouldn't hold up in court. Some of them that are exploitative. What you do is you contact all those Dark Passage players. You tell them all, give me a contract, let me look at it, I'll look it up. And you just fuck Dark Passage on a legal basis at every possible turn. So here's the thing though. I make that joke. That'd be a brilliant story in Denmark. I don't actually know if I'd do that in Turkey, mate. I feel as though if you push that one too far in Turkey, they have ways that don't involve a court. You might be traveling thousands of miles again, just all parts of different directions. That's all I'm going to say. Exactly. That might not work out for you. When I was saying it though, I thought it through. I thought it through on that one.
All right. Thanks so much for your time.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say I'm a big fan of both of you, and I follow all of your content. So keep doing the work you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, man.
See you, mate. This video was kindly supported by Patrick Ribeiro, Penguin9, Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Fat Guy got 24 ADR in an online qualifier, Lee Chaolan, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, JDubs, Chi Mao, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, Kolja G, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Now, do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my content? Obviously, I have quite a varied output. Do you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA? Maybe you want teasers, see who the guests are on my next shows. Do you want to take part in a donator discussion with me about esports? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scrilluminati today. In the description box below, there's a Patreon link.